She had $5 to her name. 5 crumpled dollars folded inside a handbag she'd borrowed from her cousin, the same cousin who'd spent 2 hours curling her hair, painting her lips, and telling her she looked like a movie star. $5 that represented everything Marisol Delgado had left after rent, after groceries, after wiring money home to the grandmother who raised her and the little sister who still needed antibiotics for an ear infection that wouldn't quit. $5, a borrowed dress, and a text message on her phone that was about to shatter whatever was left of her heart. But here's what Marisol didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known in that moment, sitting alone in a restaurant full of strangers who looked at her like she'd wandered into the wrong life. 30 feet away, in a private alcove tucked behind a marble column, a man was watching her. A man who had seen her nearly every single day for the past 3 years but had never, not once, truly looked at her. And what he was about to do would change the course of both their lives forever. Now let me ask you something, family. Have you ever been in a room full of people and felt completely invisible? Have you ever put yourself out there, risked everything you had, every ounce of courage in your body, only to be told that you weren't enough? That you weren't what someone was looking for? If you have, then you already know the kind of pain Marisol was about to feel. The kind that doesn't just bruise your pride, it breaks something deep inside you that takes years to rebuild. Tonight, a woman who had spent her entire life being overlooked was about to be humiliated in the cruelest way possible. And the man who witnessed it, her own employer, a millionaire who had never once bothered to learn anything about her beyond her name on a payroll, was about to make a decision that would destroy every wall between their two worlds. What happened next didn't just change one evening. It changed 2 lives forever. And by the end of the story, you'll understand why sometimes the worst night of your life is actually the beginning of everything you've been searching for. If you believe in love that defies the odds, hit that subscribe button right now and join our Infinite Love Tales family, because this story is one you will never, ever forget. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Marisol Delgado woke up every morning at 4:45 a.m., not because she wanted to, but because the world she lived in didn't offer her the luxury of sleeping in. By 5:15, she was dressed in plain clothes, navy pants, a gray blouse, her hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. By 5:30, she was standing at the bus stop on South Ashland Avenue, waiting in the pre-dawn cold alongside other workers who carried the same tired look in their eyes. The bus carried her 45 minutes north, through neighborhoods that changed with every mile, the buildings growing taller, the streets growing cleaner, the people growing fewer. By 6:30, she arrived at the service entrance of Lakefront Tower, a gleaming 70-story high-rise on the edge of Lake Michigan. She was not allowed to use the main lobby. The main lobby was for residents, people who belonged. Marisol took the service elevator, the one that smelled like cleaning supplies and industrial carpet, up to the 69th floor. That's where Victor Ashford lived. At 27 years old, Marisol had been cleaning Victor's penthouse for 3 years. She knew every inch of that place, 2 full floors of floor-to-ceiling windows, imported Italian marble, furniture that cost more than her entire apartment building, and an art collection that could fund a small country. She knew which drawer held his cufflinks, which cabinet hid his single malt scotch, which shelf in his study housed a worn paperback copy of a poetry collection that he thought no one had ever noticed. She knew the scratch on the 3rd step of the spiral staircase, the slight wobble in the kitchen faucet, the exact angle he liked his study curtains drawn to let in the morning light without the glare. She knew everything about his home. She knew nothing about his heart, and he knew even less about hers. To Victor, Marisol was, and this is the truth that cut her most quietly, invisible. He was never unkind, never rude. He nodded when she arrived. He murmured, "Thank you," when she placed fresh towels outside his bathroom. Once, when she was sick and missed 2 days, he sent a brief text through his assistant asking if she was all right. But he never looked at her. Not really. Not the way you look at someone whose story you want to know. She existed in his peripheral vision, a function, a mechanism, part of the silent machinery that kept his immaculate world turning. And Marisol had long ago accepted that this was her place in the world. The person who cleaned, the person who served, the person who moved through other people's lives without leaving a mark. But here is what Victor Ashford didn't know, what no one knew except her cousin Paloma and the worn sketchbook hidden at the bottom of her tote bag. Marisol was an artist. She drew portraits, faces she saw on the bus, in laundromats, at park benches. Strangers who didn't know they were being watched. She captured them in graphite and charcoal, every wrinkle, every shadow, every unguarded expression, because Marisol believed that everyone deserved to be noticed, even if no one had ever noticed her. Her dream, the one she kept folded up tight inside her chest like a letter she was afraid to send, was to open a small art studio for children. Nothing grand, just a little storefront in her neighborhood where kids from families like hers could come after school, pick up a brush, and discover that beauty wasn't something reserved for people who could afford museum tickets. Beauty was everywhere. You just had to learn how to see it. Marisol Delgado didn't dream of wealth. She didn't dream of fame or fortune. She dreamed of something far simpler and far more elusive. She dreamed of being seen. Now let me tell you about the man who lived 69 floors above the world, but had never felt lower in his life. Victor Ashford was 41 years old. He had dark hair silvering at the temples, sharp features that photographers loved, and the kind of posture that comes from a lifetime of being told to stand up, straight, and carry the weight of a dynasty. He was the CEO of Ashford Technologies, a company his father, Roman Ashford, had built from a rented garage and a borrowed laptop into one of Chicago's most dominant tech firms. Roman had been a visionary, a relentless force who believed that legacy was the only currency that mattered. He also believed that rest was for the weak. He dropped dead of a massive heart attack at 54, face down on his desk, phone still in his hand, mid-sentence on a call with his chief financial officer. He left behind a company worth billions, a wife named Genevieve, who had married into wealth and now guarded its perimeter with the ferocity of a woman who understood exactly what she had to lose, and a son, Victor, who inherited everything his father had built and none of the instructions for how to carry it without being crushed. Victor's penthouse was a monument to success and a tomb of loneliness. He lived surrounded by beauty he couldn't feel, wealth he couldn't enjoy, and silence so thick it swallowed every sound except the one that played late at night when he was certain no one could hear. Because Victor Ashford had a secret. At 2 a.m, when the city lights blurred against the lake like spilled paint, he sat down at the grand piano in his living room and played. Not performances, not rehearsed pieces, original compositions, melodies that poured out of him like confessions, music he wrote for a life he'd never lived. No one had ever heard them. No one knew they existed. The businessman the world saw by day was an artist by night, starving for beauty and meaning in a life that offered him everything except the things that actually mattered. His relationship with Marisol was a perfect mirror of his relationship with the world, polite, functional, and completely hollow. 3 years of good mornings and thank yous. 3 years of occupying the same space without once crossing the invisible line that separated employer from employee, wealth from want, a man from the woman who moved through his home like a ghost he'd chosen not to see. Victor Ashford had everything money could buy and nothing money couldn't. He lived in the tallest building in the city and had never felt smaller in his entire life. And then came the night that changed everything. It started with a dating app. Marisol had downloaded it 3 weeks earlier at Paloma's insistence. "You're 27 years old, Prima," Paloma had said, scrolling through profiles on Marisol's phone while Marisol protested from the kitchen. "You work, you send money home, you draw pictures of strangers. That's not a life, that's a routine. You need to live, you need to let someone in." So Marisol let the app in, and within a few days, she matched with a man named Derek. His profile picture showed a friendly face, an easy smile. His first message was simple: "Your eyes are incredible. Tell me something about yourself that isn't on your profile." It caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her something like that. She told him about her sketchbook. He said that was the coolest thing he'd ever heard. They talked every day for 2.5 weeks. He was warm, playful. He asked about her day. He made her laugh with stories about his cat who kept knocking things off the counter out of spite. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Marisol felt like someone was interested in her, not as a cleaner, not as a provider, but as a woman. When Derek suggested they meet in person, Marisol's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack a rib. When he named the restaurant, Lunette Étoile, a French bistro near the river, her heart nearly stopped altogether. She had walked past that restaurant 100 times on her way to the bus stop. Gold-lit windows, couples in silk and cashmere, a world behind glass she had never been invited into. She almost said no, almost typed the words, "Can we go somewhere simpler?" But something stopped her. A voice inside that sounded suspiciously like Paloma's said, "You deserve a table in that restaurant just as much as anyone else." So she said yes. The preparation happened at Paloma's apartment. 2 hours of transformation. Paloma curled Marisol's long black hair into cascading waves that fell past her shoulders like dark water. She painted her lips a bold crimson, Not the color Marisol would have chosen, but Paloma insisted it was perfect. And then came the dress. Burgundy, fitted, borrowed, the kind of dress that changes the way a woman stands, the way she breathes, the way she sees herself in the mirror. When Marisol looked at her reflection, she barely recognized the woman staring back. "You look like a movie star," Paloma said, squeezing her shoulders from behind. "Don't you dare let anyone make you feel less than that." But beneath the curls and the crimson and the borrowed confidence, Marisol's hands were shaking. She had never been on a real date. She didn't know wine lists or silverware etiquette or what to do when the waiter asked questions in French. She was terrified of saying the wrong thing, ordering the wrong thing, being the wrong thing. Before she left, she checked her purse. Phone, a stick of lip gloss, and a crumpled $5 bill, every cent she had left until her next paycheck. She tucked it carefully into the inner pocket, not because $5 could buy anything at a restaurant like Lune et Etoile, but because having something, anything, to hold on to made her feel slightly less like she was walking off the edge of a cliff. The drive took 20 minutes. Her car, a 15-year-old sedan with a dented front fender and a rearview mirror held in place with electrical tape, rattled through streets that grew progressively more polished with every block. By the time she pulled up in front of the restaurant, the contrast was almost laughable. Valets in black vests, a couple stepping out of a car that cost more than Marisol would earn in a decade. And there, through the gold-lit windows, a world of white linen and crystal and candlelight. She sat in her car for 3 full minutes, gripping the steering wheel, telling herself to breathe. Then she got out. She walked to the door. She stepped inside. The hostess, a slender woman with cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, scanned Marisol from heel to hairline in a single practiced sweep. Her smile was professional and precise and did not reach anywhere near her eyes. Marisol gave Derek's name. The hostess led her to a table near the center of the dining room, not tucked away in a corner, not shielded by a column or a partition. Dead center, exposed, visible from every angle, like a specimen placed under glass for the entire room to examine. Marisol sat down. She smoothed her borrowed dress. She checked her reflection in the back of a spoon. And she waited. 7:30. The reservation time. She was right on time. She folded her hands in her lap. She studied the menu and immediately wished she hadn't. A single appetizer cost more than she made in a full day of work. An entree cost more than her weekly grocery budget. She set the menu down and decided she would wait for Derek. They'd figure it out together. That was the plan. Together. 7:45. No Derek. No message. The waiter appeared. A tall man with a smile so practiced it might as well have been painted on. "Would you like to order something while you wait, miss?" She shook her head. "He'll be here soon." The waiter nodded and retreated. She felt the first prickle of unease. 8 o'clock. Still nothing. Marisol checked her phone. No missed calls, no messages. She typed and deleted 3 texts to Derek. Too desperate, too clingy, too much. She set the phone face down on the table and pressed her palms flat against the white linen, willing them to stop trembling. The restaurant was watching. She could feel it. A woman at the bar, diamond earrings, champagne flute, a smile like a razor, leaned toward her companion and whispered something while glancing in Marisol's direction. A couple 2 tables over exchanged a look that said everything without a single word. The waiter returned again. "Still waiting, miss?" The question was polite. The subtext was not. "Yes," Marisol said. Her voice sounded thin, unconvincing, even to her own ears. 8:20. The hope that had carried her through 3 weeks of messages, through 2 hours of preparation, through the walk into this golden world, that hope was dying. Slowly, publicly, in front of an audience that seemed to be enjoying the show, Marisol ordered a glass of water just to justify her presence at the table. Her hands were shaking so badly, she nearly knocked it over when it arrived. She wrapped both palms around the glass like it was the only solid thing left in the universe. 8:37. Her phone buzzed. Her heart leaped, a desperate, pathetic little lurch of hope that she hated herself for feeling. She grabbed the phone, unlocked it, read the message. 2 sentences. No greeting, no explanation, no punctuation worthy of the devastation they carried. "Hey, sorry, I don't think this is going to work out. You seem nice, but I'm looking for something different. Something different." The words landed like a fist to the center of her chest. She read them once, twice, 3 times. Each reading drove them deeper, past her skin, past her ribs, into the soft, unprotected place where she kept every rejection she'd ever swallowed. Something different, not something better, not someone else. Something different, as if she were a flavor that didn't quite satisfy, an item that didn't match the decor, a thing, not a person, that failed to meet specifications. He hadn't even met her, hadn't looked into her eyes or heard her voice or given her 30 seconds to be anything other than a photograph on a screen. And he had decided, from whatever comfortable distance he was sitting in right now, that she was not enough. Tears gathered at the corners of Marisol's eyes. She blinked furiously, desperately, refusing to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people who already looked at her like she was trespassing in their world. She reached for her purse. She needed to leave. Now, before the last thread of her composure snapped and she shattered into 1,000 pieces on this pristine marble floor. But her fingers were clumsy, trembling, uncoordinated, and as she fumbled for her bag, her elbow caught the water glass. It didn't break, but it clattered loudly against the silverware, sending a sharp sound ringing through the dining room like a bell. Every head turned, every eye found her, and somewhere to her left, a woman let out a quiet, breathy laugh, the kind of laugh that isn't meant to be funny, the kind that says, "Of course, what did you expect?" That laugh broke something inside Marisol that she wasn't sure could be repaired. She stood, clutched her borrowed bag against her chest like armor, turned toward the door. She was going to walk out of this restaurant, get into her dented car, drive home to her empty apartment, and never, never put herself in a position to be humiliated like this again. She was done. Done hoping. Done trying. Done believing that a woman like her could ever belong in a room like this or a life that wasn't designed for surviving. Now, family, if this story ended here, it would be a tragedy. A woman crushed by cruelty, swallowed by a world that never wanted her. But this story doesn't end here. Because what Marisol didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known while she was standing at that table with tears burning in her eyes and $5 in her purse, was that someone had been watching her the entire time. And he was already on his feet. Before we continue, I need you to do something for me. If this story is already pulling at your heart, drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people? Have you ever been told you weren't enough by someone who never took the time to know you? I read every single comment, and your stories matter to me just as much as this one. Now let me tell you what happened next, because this is where everything changes. Rewind 45 minutes. Victor Ashford had arrived at Lune Étoile at 7:50 p.m. for a dinner meeting with a potential investor, a venture capitalist named Hargrove who had been circling Ashford Technologies for months. At 8:05, Hargrove texted to cancel. Scheduling conflict, the message said. Both men knew it was a lie. Some deal had soured somewhere, some rumor had circulated, some calculation had shifted. Victor didn't care enough to be angry. He was tired, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix, the kind that lives in your bones. He decided to stay. He ordered a glass of Bordeaux, retreated to a private alcove at the far end of the restaurant, and pulled out his tablet. Acquisition reports, quarterly projections, the numbing language of commerce that had become his native tongue. He read without absorbing. He drank without tasting. He existed without feeling. And then something pulled his attention toward the center of the room. A woman, sitting alone, burgundy dress, dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders. She was beautiful, not in the manufactured, calculated way he was accustomed to seeing in his world, but in a way that felt genuine, warm, real, like light from a window on a cold day. He noticed her the way you notice a painting that stops you mid-stride in a gallery. Something about her demanded attention. It took him a full minute to realize who she was. Marisol, his housekeeper, the woman who moved through his penthouse every morning like a shadow, the woman he had nodded to 1,000 times without ever once truly seeing. But tonight, in that dress, in that light, in a context stripped of uniforms and cleaning supplies and the invisible hierarchy that governed their daily interactions, he saw her, really saw her, and the recognition hit him like a hand pressing against his chest. He watched. He couldn't look away. He watched her sit with elegant patience, checking her phone, smoothing her dress, studying a menu she clearly couldn't afford. He watched the hope in her posture, the way she sat up straighter every time the restaurant door opened. He watched that hope slowly, agonizingly deflate. He watched the waiter return with his practiced condescension. He watched the other diners whisper and glance and dismiss, and then he watched the moment her phone lit up. He saw her reach for it with desperate hope. He saw her read the message. And he saw, with a clarity that would haunt him for the rest of his life, the exact moment her face collapsed. The way her shoulders curled inward. The way her hand pressed against her mouth to hold back the sound that wanted to escape. The way she became in an instant the smallest person in a very large room. Something tore inside Victor Ashford. Not cracked, not bent. Tore, like a wall he'd spent decades building suddenly ripped open to reveal a hollow space behind it that had been there all along, waiting to be filled. For 3 years, this woman had moved through his home, and he had looked past her the way he looked past walls. He had treated her like furniture, essential, functional, utterly without story. He had never asked where she came from, never wondered what she dreamed about, never noticed the sketchbook she carried in her bag or the charcoal smudges she sometimes had on her fingertips when she arrived in the morning. 3 years, 1,000 mornings, and he had been completely, unforgivably blind. He stood up. Not a decision, an instinct, something deeper than thought, more urgent than reason. His body moved before his mind could construct a single objection. He crossed the restaurant, past the whispering couples, past the woman with the diamond earrings, past the waiter with his painted-on smile, and he walked straight toward the woman in the burgundy dress who was one breath away from disappearing. Marisol was on her feet when he reached her, bag clutched against her chest, eyes brimming, mascara threatening to betray her. She was turning toward the door, and then she heard a voice she knew, a voice she had heard 1,000 times in hallways and kitchens and doorways, always distant, always professional, always belonging to a world above hers. But tonight it said her name in a way she had never heard before. Marisol. She froze, looked up, and the shock that crossed her face, the sheer impossibility of this moment, was something Victor would carry with him forever. "Mr. Ashford?" Her voice was barely audible, strangled between surprise and shame. Of all the people in the world to witness her humiliation, of all the places for her carefully separated worlds to collide, her employer, standing 3 feet away, looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. "Marisol," he said again, and his voice, God, his voice was gentle, tender, as if he were holding something fragile. "Please, sit down, stay." She shook her head. Reflex, self-preservation. "I can't. I was just leaving. You don't have to." "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm asking you to stay anyway, not because I have to, because I want to." There was a texture in those words she had never heard from him. Not the clipped efficiency of a man giving instructions, not the polite distance of someone acknowledging the help. This was something stripped bare, something human, something that sounded, impossibly, like need. She sat back down. So did he. He took the chair across from her, the chair that had been empty all night, the chair that was supposed to hold a man who never came, and suddenly it held a man who had been there all along. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The restaurant hummed around them, clinking glasses, murmured conversations, the soft melody of a jazz trio in the corner. But at their table, there was only silence. The kind of silence that happens when two people are deciding whether to be honest with each other. Victor spoke first. "Someone stood you up." Not a question. A statement made with the quiet certainty of a man who had watched the whole thing unfold. Marisol's throat tightened. She nodded. He said he was looking for something different. The words came out rough, scraped raw. She stared at the tablecloth. "I suppose he saw my profile, saw my life, and decided I wasn't worth the drive over." Victor felt heat rise in his chest, not embarrassment, not discomfort, fury. Pure, clean, righteous fury aimed not at her, but at every force in the universe that had conspired to make this extraordinary woman believe she was ordinary. "Then he is blind," Victor said, his voice low and absolutely certain. "And I am the worst kind of fool for having been blind right alongside him." Marisol looked up. Her dark eyes, still wet, searched his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. She was looking for mockery, for pity, for the polished condescension she had encountered from wealthy people her entire life. She found none of it. What she found instead was something that made the ground shift beneath her feet. Victor Ashford was looking at her the way she had spent 27 years dreaming someone would look at her. Like she mattered. Like she was real. Like she was seen. "What do you mean?" She whispered. I mean that for 3 years you have walked through my home every single day, and I never once stopped to see you. Not really, not the way I'm seeing you right now." He paused, and she watched him struggle with something, an emotion too large for the composed exterior he had spent his life perfecting. "And I am ashamed of that, Marisol, deeply, truly ashamed." The air between them changed. The invisible wall that had always separated them, employer and employee, wealth and want, his world and hers, didn't dissolve. It simply became irrelevant, like discovering that the barrier you'd been pressing against your whole life was made of paper. Victor signaled the waiter. "We'll need menus, please, and a bottle of whatever she'd like." Marisol's hand flew up. "No, Mr. Ashford, I can't. I don't." She thought of the $5 bill in her purse, the impossibility of this moment. "Victor," he corrected gently. "Please, call me Victor, and tonight you are not my employee. I am not your employer. Tonight we are just two people who were both abandoned at a restaurant and decided to keep each other company." The reframing was so simple, so elegant, that it unlocked something inside her. She exhaled, truly, fully exhaled, for the first time that entire evening. And then, unexpectedly, improbably, she laughed, a short, startled burst of sound that surprised them both. "Wait," she said, a disbelieving smile pulling at the corners of her mouth. "You were stood up too?" Victor's lips twitched. Business dinner, canceled via text. Apparently I also wasn't what someone was looking for tonight. Her laughter deepened, warm and genuine and completely unguarded, and Victor felt something flood through his chest that he hadn't experienced in so long he'd forgotten it existed. Joy. Not satisfaction, not accomplishment, not the hollow victory of closing a deal. Joy. Pure, simple, devastating. They ordered, they ate, and then something miraculous happened. They talked, not about work or schedules or household instructions, about life, the real, messy, beautiful, unpolished version that neither of them ever shared with anyone. Marisol told him about growing up on the South Side with her grandmother, Abuela Rosa, who raised her on stories and salsa music and the unshakable belief that love was the only thing in the world worth fighting for. She told him about her sister Lucia, 17 years old, brilliant, determined to become a nurse even though the money was never enough. She told him about the art, the sketchbook, the charcoal portraits, the faces of strangers captured in graphite because Marisol believed that everyone deserved to be noticed. And then, quietly, like someone opening a door they'd kept locked for years, she told him her dream. The art studio, a small storefront, children from families like hers, paintbrushes and canvases, and the revolutionary idea that beauty isn't something reserved for the wealthy. It's everywhere, in everything, if you just learn how to see it. Victor listened with an intensity that startled them both. And then she turned the question on him. "What about you?" she asked, leaning forward with a directness that no one in his life had ever shown him. "What's your dream, Victor? What do you want beyond board meetings and quarterly reports?" The question hit him like a spotlight in a dark room. No one asked him things like that. People asked about his companies, his margins, his market strategies, never his dreams, never his heart. "I don't know anymore," he admitted, and the honesty of it scraped something raw inside him. "My father built this empire and handed it to me like a crown I never asked to wear. I've spent my entire adult life maintaining it. I'm not sure I ever chose it." "If you could choose," Marisol pressed gently, "if none of it mattered, the expectations, the pressure, all of it, what would you want?" Victor was quiet for a long moment, and then a truth he had never spoken aloud surfaced like something rising from deep water. "Music," he said. "Teaching maybe, something that touches lives instead of stock prices. My grandfather, before my father pulled him into the business, was a music teacher. He was the happiest person I ever knew." "Then why don't you?" Marisol asked. Simple, direct, as if the answer were obvious. "Because there are expectations, responsibilities, hundreds of people who depend on the company." "Maybe," she agreed. "But you could find a way to do both. You could teach part-time, volunteer, mentor. There's always a way to feed your soul, Victor, even when duty feeds your body." Her wisdom hit him with the force of something he'd been waiting his entire life to hear. Here was a woman who had every reason to be bitter, every reason to resent the world's unfairness. Yet she spoke with hope and possibility. She worked a job that many would consider beneath her gifts, yet she found beauty in sketching strangers and joy in dreaming of children with paintbrushes. She had been rejected and humiliated tonight, yet she sat here with grace and kindness and a quiet courage that put his to shame. and then Marisol reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The gesture surprised them both. Her palm was warm. Her fingers were calloused from years of work and stained faintly with the ghost of charcoal. "I see you, Victor," she said softly. "Maybe for the first time. I think we're both really seeing each other tonight." The warmth of her hand spread through him like sunlight through a window that had been shuttered for years. And in that moment, in a restaurant full of strangers, at a table set for two, on a night that had begun with cruelty and was ending with grace, something extraordinary began. They walked out into the cool Chicago night at 11:15. The city glowed around them, the lake a dark mirror reflecting 1,000 lights. The air smelled of late spring, of possibility, of something neither of them could name but both of them could feel. They stood by Marisol's car, the 15-year-old sedan with a dented fender and the taped mirror, and the contrast between her world and his had never been more visible. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a bridge they were both standing on, meeting in the middle. "Thank you," Marisol said. "This night started as the worst of my life. You turned it into something I'll never forget." "It wasn't charity," Victor said, stepping closer. "It was selfishness. I didn't want you to leave. I didn't want to lose the chance to know you." "Can I see you again?" he asked. And his voice, the voice of a man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals, was uncertain, tentative, afraid, not as your employer, not as Mr. Ashford, as Victor. "Can we do this again?" She knew she should say no. She knew the impossibility, the risk, the power imbalance, the 1,000 ways this could end in heartbreak. But she looked into his eyes and saw something she recognized: loneliness. The same loneliness she carried, the same hunger to be seen. "Yes," she whispered. "I'd like that very much." The next morning, she arrived at the penthouse with butterflies tearing through her stomach. She expected awkwardness, distance, the return of professional walls. Instead, she found Victor in the kitchen, making coffee, something that had never happened before in 3 years. He looked up when she walked in, and his face broke into a smile so genuine it stole her breath. "Would you join me on the terrace?" he asked. "Before you start your day." A simple invitation, a universe inside it. Over the following weeks, they fell into a new rhythm. Days maintained the structure of professionalism, but evenings became theirs. They cooked in his vast kitchen, Marisol teaching him Abuela Rosa's recipes, laughing at his clumsy knife work, guiding his hands through the steps with patient humor. They walked along the lakefront at dusk, conversations stretching for hours. She showed him her sketchbook, page after page of faces so alive they seemed to breathe off the paper. He sat at his piano and played for her, compositions that made her close her eyes and lean into the sound as if it were a physical embrace. She took him to the community center where she volunteered. He stood in a room full of children and watched Marisol hand out crayons with the tenderness of someone who understood that art could save a life. He discovered in that moment that he had been starving, not for food or success, but for meaning. And this woman had been carrying more of it in her worn tote bag than he had accumulated in his entire gilded life. He discovered her depth. She discovered his secrets, the anonymous donations to schools and hospitals he never publicized, the poetry books hidden in his study, the man behind the machinery. Beneath the CEO was an artist. Beneath the penthouse was a prison. And Marisol held the only key. They laughed together, something Victor hadn't done freely in years. They argued about music and movies and the best way to season rice. They sat in comfortable silence. And slowly, carefully, like two people building something fragile and precious, they fell in love. But they both knew the truth. This couldn't stay hidden forever, and when the world found out, it would try to tear them apart. Now, family, I need you to brace yourselves, because what happens next almost destroyed everything. If you're feeling this story in your heart right now, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Send it to someone who's ever felt invisible. Send it to someone who's ever been told they weren't enough. Because this story is about to take a turn that none of us saw coming. The storm arrived 6 weeks after that fateful night at Lunaire Étoile. It came in the form of a photograph. A gossip columnist spotted them at a riverfront cafe. Marisol sketching Victor's portrait while they shared gelato and laughter, leaning toward each other with the unmistakable intimacy of two people in love. The camera captured everything, the way he looked at her, the way her hand rested on his arm, the way the world around them ceased to exist. The headline hit every screen in Chicago by morning: Tech Titan's secret affair with his housekeeper. and the world exploded. Victor's mother, Genevieve, arrived at the penthouse within hours, unannounced, uninvited, and incandescent with fury. She stood in the foyer in her tailored cream suit, diamond earrings catching the light like tiny weapons, and delivered her verdict with surgical precision. A cleaning girl, Victor, after everything this family has built, after everything your father sacrificed? She's not a cleaning girl, Mother, Victor said, his voice calm as stone. She is the woman I'm in love with. Genevieve's eyes widened, then narrowed, then hardened into something that looked like grief disguised as rage. Love is a luxury people like us cannot afford. Not this kind, not the reckless kind. End this, before it destroys everything your father created. Father created a company, Victor said. He didn't create a life. There's a difference, and I'm done pretending there isn't. The board of directors called an emergency meeting within 48 hours. They sat around a mahogany conference table and delivered their ultimatum with the cold efficiency of men who measured human value in quarterly returns: end the relationship or be removed as CEO. Investors pulled back. Partners distanced themselves. His publicist called 17 times in one day, begging for a denial statement, a clarification, anything to stop the bleeding. But the cruelest blows didn't come from the boardroom. They came from everywhere else. The media was merciless. Billionaire's Cinderella screamed one headline. Ashford Air slums it with the help, sneered another. Online commenters dissected Marisol like a specimen: gold digger, opportunist, a woman reaching above her station. Anonymous accounts created memes. Strangers sent messages so vicious they made Marisol's hands shake. And then her own community turned. Friends stopped calling. Women at the community center she'd volunteered at for years went silent when she walked in. Someone she'd known since childhood posted on social media, "Guess scrubbing toilets paid off after all." And one evening, Marisol came home to find a single word spray-painted across her apartment door in red: sellout. She stood in the hallway staring at that word for a long time. Then she cleaned it off with the same hands that had cleaned 1,000 surfaces for 1,000 people who never bothered to learn her name. She cleaned it off alone, but the wound remained. One evening, a Thursday, raining, the city gray and heavy, Marisol arrived at Victor's penthouse with red-rimmed eyes and a resolve that was breaking her apart from the inside. "Maybe they're right," she said, standing in his living room, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her own body together. "Maybe I'm not built for your world. Maybe I'm destroying yours by trying to pretend I belong in it." She took a breath that shuddered through her entire frame. "I think I should go, Victor. I think I should walk away before I cost you everything." It was the most selfless thing she had ever said, and the most devastating, because she meant it. She would rather shatter her own heart than watch his world collapse because of her. Victor crossed the room in 3 strides. He took her face in both hands, gently, reverently, as if holding something holy, and tilted her gaze up to meet his. "Listen to me," he said, and his voice shook with an emotion so raw it frightened them both. "You don't belong in my world. My world is cold and hollow and artificial. My world is marble floors and board meetings and people who smile at you while they calculate what you're worth." He pressed his forehead against hers. "You belong in our world, the one we're building together, the one with grandmother's recipes and piano music and charcoal sketches and laughter, the one that's real. But your company, your family, everything you've—" "My company is a machine," he said fiercely. "My family will adapt or they won't, but you, Marisol, you are irreplaceable. You are the only thing in my life that has ever felt true. I am not giving that up. I am not giving you up. Not for a board of directors, not for a headline, not for anyone." Marisol's tears fell freely now, not tears of shame, but of something she had never quite allowed herself to feel before. The overwhelming, terrifying, world-altering knowledge that she was loved. Truly, completely, irrevocably loved. Not for what she could provide. Not for how she looked in a borrowed dress. For who she was. The artist. The dreamer, the woman with charcoal on her fingers and $5 in her purse, who still believed that beauty was everywhere. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "Then be terrified with me," Victor said, and he kissed her, a kiss that tasted like salt and promise and the beginning of something that could not be taken away. The following week, Victor called a press conference. He stood behind a podium in front of 30 cameras and 100 microphones, Marisol at his side, her hand in his, her chin high, her eyes steady. His statement was simple, and it changed everything. "My name is Victor Ashford. I am 41 years old, and I am in love with Marisol Delgado. She is not my maid, though she has worked in my home with more grace and dignity than I have ever demonstrated in a boardroom. She is not my scandal, though many have tried to make her one. She is my partner, my equal, and the woman I intend to spend my life with." He paused. The cameras clicked like rainfall. "I am stepping down as CEO of Ashford Technologies, not because I was forced to, because for the first time in my life, I am choosing myself, the real self, the one who plays piano at 2 in the morning and writes music no one has ever heard, the one who spent 41 years drowning in gold and couldn't breathe." He looked at Marisol. She looked back, and the entire world watched two people choose each other. To those who judge us, I say this: you don't know what love is until you find someone who sees you completely and loves you anyway. I found that, and no amount of money, no title, no legacy could ever compare to that gift. The press conference went viral within the hour, and something remarkable happened. The conversation shifted. People stopped talking about scandal and started talking about courage. Thousands shared their own stories, love across class lines, across cultures, across every boundary the world had ever drawn. The narrative transformed from shame to inspiration, from judgment to hope. Victor's brother Nolan, who had spent years in the shadow of the firstborn, stepped into the CEO role with quiet competence, and something between the brothers healed in the transition. An acknowledgement, unspoken but understood, that both had been prisoners of a legacy neither had chosen. Genevieve remained cold for months, but the thaw came in an unexpected place. She attended the opening of Marisol's art studio, a small storefront in Pilsen painted sunflower yellow, filled with second-hand easels and donated supplies and the sound of children's laughter. Genevieve stood in the doorway and watched Marisol kneel beside a 6-year-old girl, guiding a tiny hand across canvas, whispering, "That's perfect, you see? You made something beautiful." Something behind Genevieve's careful armor cracked. She saw, finally, not a threat to her family, but the very thing her family had always lacked: warmth. Genuine, unconditional, unreserved warmth. "I misjudged you," Genevieve said that evening, her voice stiff but sincere, "and I owe you an apology." Marisol took her hand, the same hand that had once gestured at her with contempt, and held it gently. "You were protecting your son. I understand that. I hope you'll see that I'm trying to do the same." Victor proposed on a quiet Tuesday evening, in the art studio, after the last child had gone home and the light through the yellow-painted windows had turned golden. He got down on one knee on a floor splattered with every color of the rainbow, acrylic footprints and watercolor splatters, and the beautiful chaos of young imaginations set free. He held up a ring, a simple gold band with a small garnet stone, the exact shade of the burgundy dress she'd worn the night they found each other. "You taught me that being seen is the greatest gift one person can give another," he said, his voice unsteady in a way that would have been unthinkable in the boardroom but was perfect here. "I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel invisible again." "Yes," Marisol said, laughing and crying at the same time, pulling him off his knee and into her arms. 1,000 times, yes. Their wedding was small, held in the garden behind the studio, a patch of green Marisol had planted with wildflowers and herbs that made the air smell like rosemary and possibility. Abuela Rosa flew in from Mexico and wept through the entire ceremony. Nolan served as best man. Paloma, radiant in a yellow dress, caught the bouquet and declared it fate. Even Genevieve smiled, dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief she pretended was for allergies. Their first dance was set to a piece of music that no audience had ever heard, a composition Victor had written for Marisol in the weeks after their first night together, played through a small speaker propped against a flower pot. It was imperfect. It was beautiful. It was theirs. He held her close and whispered against her hair. "You saved me." She whispered back. "We saved each other." And in that garden, surrounded by wildflowers and the people who had witnessed their impossible journey, two lives that were never supposed to intersect, proved something the world keeps trying. To forget that love, real love, brave love, the kind that sees past every surface and every barrier and every lie society has ever told about who belongs with whom, that love is unstoppable. Sometimes you have to be shattered before you can be truly seen. Sometimes the worst night of your life is the doorway to everything you've been searching for. Sometimes love is simply two people deciding that together is better than apart, no matter what anyone else thinks. And sometimes, a woman walks into a restaurant with $5 in her purse and walks out with the rest of her life. Family, if this story touched your heart, I mean really touched it, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button, Let me know this story moved you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what moment hit you the hardest? Was it the text message? The moment he crossed the restaurant? The press conference? The proposal on the paint-splattered floor? I want to hear from you. Share this video with someone who needs it today. Send it to a friend who's ever felt invisible. Send it to someone who's been told they're not enough. Because this story proves, with every single word, that they are. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Infinite Love Tales by Mr. White and turn on that notification bell so you never miss a story. Every week, we bring you stories that remind you what truly matters in this life. Not money, not status, not the opinions of people who've never taken the time to see you. What matters is being seen. What matters is being loved. And what matters is having the courage to choose that love every single day, no matter what the world throws at you. Thank you for being part of this family. I love you all. Until next time, Infinite Love Tales by Mr. White.